Unstable. Press that.
All right, all set. Yes, sir. Ready? All right. So I'd like to call the meeting to order of the City of Columbia Plan Commission for April 12th, 2021. And with that, we will take roll.
Doug Farmer,
Here.
Al Hoppy,
Here.
Pete Ingold,
Here.
Beth Cutter Sanchez. Here. Amy Missler here, Tony Murphy,
Here.
Lauren Nubby,
Here.
Will Trowbridge, Andrew Yocum.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. It's a good thing. So next item on our agenda is the approval of minutes from our last meeting. That's item 3A on your agenda. That was from March 8th, 2021. Has everybody had a chance to look at those? Do they have any questions, comments, or complaints, changes? Now would be your chance. If not, I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thanks, Andrew.
I'll second.
All right. Yeah, all right. With that, we'll take a vote.
Doug Farmer,
Yes.
Al Hoppy,
Yes.
Ingold,
Yes.
Beth Cutter Sanchez.
Yes.
Amy Missler, yes, Tony Murphy,
Yes.
Lauren Nubby,
Yes.
Andrew Yocum.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Item 4, public input. Scott, do we have any written comments, questions come in, or any direct participants, et cetera?
No, sir, none at all.
No public attendee. Oh, yes, we do. All right. Nobody asked to speak on anything other than what's on the agenda for today. Okay, cool. Now we will move on to the number 5, the public hearing piece, which is item 5A on your agenda and in your packets, which is a request for a sign variance to section 15.44.190.j of the Columbia Sign Code. This is to allow an electronic message center, EMC, on a monument sign in excess of 6 feet in height at 900 Admiral Lionel Boulevard. Okay, so I would ask anybody that had any ex parte communications concerning this item to speak now. If not, that's okay too. Nobody, no takers. Scott, can you present the staff report on this, please?
Yes, I'd love to. So the applicant of this request is Summit Sign and Graphics. I don't see Andy here, but Mr. Harris, who is the owner of Harris Home Furnishings and Appliance, is here in the audience if there are any questions. So the applicant is seeking a sign variance as proposed. The current sign's changeable message board, which is the manually changed letters that you can do with a pole is being replaced as proposed with, there's Andy, with an electronic message center. You've seen similar cases like this in the not too distant past. And essentially, there's that and just a little bit of sign redesign too, but essentially the electronic message center is going to be about roughly the same size as the existing sign is. While adding a full brick base to convert the pole sign to a monument sign. So the structural modification, as you may recall, is necessary because the sign code only allows electronic message centers in conjunction with monument signs, but monument signs are limited to 6 feet in height, which is an utterly useless code. So I have no idea why that's the requirement. So as per the norm, we're getting a variance request because that's not high enough to see diddly. The size they're requesting is not to exceed 15 feet in height. I'd also point out the variance application also asks for relief from the sign code's 20-foot setback requirement. However, the current location of the sign and the current sign was approved accordingly, consistent with code and municipal code. And the proposed modifications will use the existing sign structure and not be relocated. So therefore, that location is legal non-conforming or grandfathered, as you refer to, so that does not require a variance for the location for the 20-foot setback. So all we're looking about at is a monument sign that exceeds the 6 feet in height. I've outlined in your report the standards of variance approval. And just by way of quick analysis, I've made 4 points. First off, based on the previous approval of the existing sign, the location does have legal non-conforming status. The variance request, the proposed sign design, sign height, and the location do share much in common with the variance approval from last year's that you did for FCB Bank, if you may recall. Or actually, I think that may have been before we consolidated the boards.
Right.
But regardless, that it's, I mean, pretty much the same type of sign, just different business is really, it almost looks exactly the same in many regards. So the request is in line with similar variance approvals. And if I had, as I recollect, I think at least the last four sign variances that were approved were this exact issue. So I'll get to this later, but that points out maybe you need to change the sign code, to be quite frank with you, because we've yet to deny one either. So at any rate, number 3, the subject property was developed at a significantly lower grade than the adjacent State Route 3 roadway. So therefore, a 6-foot tall sign would not be very visible from Route 3. And it would be reasonable for the Planning Commission to find that standard approval A has been met due to site topography. And referring back to A, that's the one with special circumstances regarding the physical character attributes of the parcel in question. And then,
Can I ask a question? What's the height of the current sign?
Andy, that's about 15 feet as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's being replaced basically in kind at 15 feet.
Okay, thanks.
A number of the parcels in the immediate vicinity are on the street there on Admiral Vinyl have double frontage. Not just, so in other words, one side is on Admiral Lionel, which is where they're addressed to, and then the other side is on State Route 3. But Route 3 obviously carries a much greater traffic load. And most of those businesses that are on the same side of the street also have signs on the back side of their property, because that faces the higher traffic route. For this reason, because it's a similar situation with many of the other properties, it would be reasonable for the Plan Commission to find that essentially all 4 standards of approval could be considered met because the sign location will not change and there are no reported detriments to public safety, welfare or neighborhood that are attributed to the current location or the current sign. So therefore, that would be a reasonable finding to make as well. That's really the end of the report, but for your reference, I've included 2 sample motions, one for approval and one for denial for your consideration. Would appreciate if you make a motion that you do read one of those verbatim, so we're able to read into the record the findings as well. So,
I have a question.
yes,
Yeah, questions.
So Andy, the base of this, is this just base brick on masonry or base brick on framing?
Yes. It's the same. I mean, like how do you ask, like in what regard do you ask the question?
Durability,
Yeah, it's like a lifetime durability.
like in 3 years, we're not gonna see face brick popping off.
No,
And it's starting to kind of delaminate kind of thing? Because I see in the
people.
Hey, Hal?
Yeah, you could, yeah.
Similar.
There we are, I'm back.
It looks like our camera cut out.
Yeah, it did.
So just a moment, we're getting IT on it.
Okay, great.
Just hang tight. You and I are the only ones on here, so it's just you and me at the moment.
Okay.
You did. Have some Jeopardy music inserted. Big thing.
specifically, like I've noticed, like at Sonic, some of the Facebook is popped off already. And I can't not notice it.
Well, now I'm gonna notice it.
I know.
There's different grades on the right.
We're still rolling on Zoom though. There's just no picture or sound coming from here,
So,
other than on my laptop.
What's that?
did you do FCBs? Sign?
No, we didn't do FCB. No, we didn't do that.
Curse of being an architect
I don't know if we did that.
constantly.
It was
Did we Warren or something?
Warren. No, not Warren. She's out of Belleville.
Demont?
No, doesn't sound right either.
I guess I should.
It is me now.
Third one.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear you now.
You hear me now? All right, so are we good to keep rolling?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, so more questions for Scott and or Andy or Mr. Harris? About 50.
You said over the podium, because it's not gonna record if you're starting from back to the room. Sorry.
And what's your name again?
Andy, first name Andy, last name Verblica.
Thank you, Andy.
So essentially, it'll be the same thing that's there now, but new. And where it was a changeable message, it'll be a digital
Right.
board, you know,
Right.
so we're not changing anything really. We're not going higher, bigger. We're not moving the placement of it. We're just updating it. And then, you know, as you know, obviously where it's located, it needs to be at that 15-foot height. And as the code reads now, we can only be 6 feet.
Actual sign piece is about halfway at the roof, at the gutter line, you know what I mean? Maybe half of the sign goes above that, so to that gutter, it looks like it's maybe 10, 12 feet tall. And then from the road, right, that chops off, that grade
Right.
chops off probably a third of that sign,
Yeah,
4 to 5
exactly.
feet.
So what a lot of municipalities do is go from road grade,
Mhm.
you know, and that's sort of where that's at.
Right, it's about what, 8 or 9 above that maybe?
Yeah, well, it's probably not even 9,
Yeah,
yeah, so.
yeah, I noticed that, it's like, well, it's really not that high.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the only fair way to do it for businesses because of, you know, given contours and things, there's nothing they can do about that.
Right.
You know, so,
I'd be almost concerned that if it was any lower, it would almost be a hazard in that way, you know what I mean? What is that? Oh, you know?
yeah, it's kind of nonsensical.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Oh, I will just point out, Chairman Garmer, that that is one of the things that are addressed in the draft of the sign code, is to address how to equalize height when the sign's grade is below the adjacent roadway.
Right.
Can you get something in there where every new business needs to buy a new sign? Well, ask
And
you.
go to some of the signing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, don't do that.
Any other questions for Edie?
Thanks.
Thank you. How tall is the FCB one? Because that's a much,
It was 14, it was between 14 and 15.
and that's a much higher grade. too, on that
It
side.
is, but it was being replaced, basically in kind.
Right.
One sign with the same height.
Right.
Because that height had previously been approved.
Okay. Everything else as far as like intensity and all that goes, it's gonna be within a code. I know at
Right.
nighttime, everybody's always. Questions, you come in or anything?
We've received,
Emails?
by the way, we did advertise it it was published in the Republic Times on the 24th of March.
Okay.
There were notices sent to the 6 businesses on neighboring parcels, and we've received no comments, questions, no inquiries whatsoever.
Thank you. All right, if there's no other questions, now would be the point that we deliberate amongst ourselves. If anybody has any other internal discussions? No? Well, if not, I would entertain a motion at this point to, and a roll call vote, of course, to either approve or deny this variance. And if,
I'm sorry, I do have one question.
sure.
So
Lauren?
I know we're still waiting on the new code and everything, but what happens, and I'm probably annoying that I'm even asking this, but what happens if other businesses on that strip want to do this? Do we have like a distance from each other or?
Yeah, at the moment, I mean, there's separation distance between parcels. However, each parcel is entitled to it. I mean, each business is entitled to its own signage, with its own square footage, its own allowances. as
Okay,
far
I
as
just want to make sure we
flagging
weren't
sign.
like, yeah, keeping anyone else from doing this if they wanted to.
No.
All right, sorry. Motion to approve.
Do you mind saying
I
the
do.
sample motion there?
Yes. All right, don't no pressure. I move that the Plan Commission, acting in its capacity as the Street Graphics Advisory Committee, finds that the applicant has met the sign code standards of variance approval and recommends approval of the requested sign variance as submitted.
And I'll second.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Hal.
So fast.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you try it.
Whenever you're ready. Secretary Missler.
Doug Garmer,
Yes.
Al Hoppy,
Yes.
Dingle,
Yes.
Beth Cutter Sanchez,
Yes.
Amy Misler, yes, Tony Murphy,
Yes.
Lauren Libby,
Yes.
Andrew Yocum.
Yes.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah. Have a good evening.
You too.
Andy, if you want to stick around, I am talking about the draft sign code if you got the time.
That's how I want to talk more about signs today.
I'll tell you what, let me send you a copy of the draft. I'd love to hear
I'll
your
be happy
feedback.
to come and look at that and do anything I can to help out with it,
Sure thing,
for sure. But I do have to go.
The kids are jumping at me.
not a problem.
See you guys, thanks.
See you later. All right. So move on to new business. And I would call your attention item 6A, which is Scott's document he's submitting here, the review session for the draft sign code update. Much awaited, anticipated.
All right. So, yes, you were emailed and sent. In emailing, I believe I made sure that you understood that I just included a copy of the existing code just for reference purposes. I didn't want to print out 80 pages for everybody. So, let's kind of start from why are we updating the sign code? There's a few reasons. The first off is there's been a few Supreme Court rulings since the sign code was originally approved. One of them basically, for all intents and purposes, says that the signs are free speech. It's a mode of expression, a form of expression. And because it's a form and an opportunity of free speech, there must be some opportunities to express that freedom of speech without requiring a permit. So what we have now, there's no zoning district that you can just throw up a sign and express your opinion on anything aside from, I mean, we pretty much lay off of any enforcement when it comes to political signage. We don't even want to get into that argument. So that's one of them. And the other thing is, there was a case back in 2015 called Reed versus Gilbert, which really gutted sign codes across the country. Because what the Supreme Court ruled in that is basically that sign codes must be content neutral. Now, what that means is a couple of things. First off, you cannot regulate the content of a sign, one thing. And secondly, you cannot regulate the sign according to content. Now, the difference is this. Basically, you can't tell anybody that they cannot put a particular message on their sign because that's their freedom of speech. So that's the content part. But to regulate according to content means things like this. There were sign classifications in the sign code, political signs, real estate signs, advertising sign, directional sign, directory sign, these classifications of sign, which for all intents and purposes, if you have to read a sign to regulate it, it's unconstitutional. So therefore, since we're regulating by these types of classifications, political, advertising, things like that, we can't regulate by that. So we've been kind of lax on our sign code enforcement because really we didn't have much cover if we tried to enforce something. So we had to enforce it very generically with categories more like a temporary and a permanent sign that aren't related to the specific content of the sign, the message that the sign's conveying. Now, one thing to notice that the Supreme Court did rule in that basically signs must be regulated by location, physical or design attributes of the sign, zoning and land uses, any means other than the content, basically. And it is interesting to note, though, one thing that the difference is like an off-premise sign, you can still regulate whether it's off-premise or on-premise. Justice Alito, in his concurring opinion, and this, which should carry some weight because he's one of the most conservative on the Supreme Court, did say that is the court considered that to be a locational criteria, not a content criteria. So you are allowed to regulate on and off-premise signs. So. Now, beyond those the case law concerns, there are other issues, and this is just my bullet points. I'm sure you all have seen other concerns with the code, but first off, it's really poorly organized and difficult to find any specific regulation that you're looking for. So if you want to find out how a specific sign is regulated, it's not easy to find. You've got to dig through the code because it's been added to from time, over time. And things have gotten out of whack, they've gotten out of order. And a lot of times that you're not finding what you're looking for because it's not in the place that it's intuitive for it to be in. It's also fair to say that this current code is pretty much out of step with current design and advertising trends. One of the things I mentioned, most communities want monument signs, and that's what they steer people to. But our monument sign height is it's capped at 6 feet. That makes absolutely no sense. So I wanted to make sure that gets fixed. Other concerns are like the digital/LED signs, like the ones that we just considered. Those are very highly regulated, and that's where everybody wants to be right now. Now, by all means, let me state that I'm not suggesting we open up everything and let everybody have video signs. It's not appropriate everywhere. And I'll get into that in a minute. The other place where the code is really restrictive is in regard to allowable sign size, allowable area of signs, as well as the number of signs you're allowed to have. Our code is by far the most restrictive I've ever worked with in my career. And I think it really limits business opportunities in this community. And I'm really, one of the focuses on the draft was specifically to address that. The definitions are outdated, and some of the definitions include regulatory language. That's really code writing 101. You don't put your regulation in your definition. You regulate in your regulations, you define in your definitions. You shouldn't have to look at a definition to figure out how high, like the limitation on monument signs is in the definition. How would you know that? Most people know what a monument sign is. How would you know to look at the definition to say how tall it can be? That doesn't make any sense. The language is pretty archaic. It's the language needs to be modernized and updated. And there are a bunch of regulatory conflicts. What I've noticed as I've dealt with the code over the last 3 years is one I can give a specific example of. For the electronic message centers, there's one place where it says where it's allowed, and then there's another place in the prohibited signs that say they're strictly prohibited. Now, technically, when there's a conflict in code, you're supposed to go with the most restrictive. But we know that it was just a mistake that they never got around to cleaning up the loose ends once they amended it to allow them. So we've been approving them regardless. So that's really what the issues were that drove the need for a new sign code. And let me actually, let me point out one of them. There are no supporting graphics in the documents. It is really difficult to understand how you're supposed to regulate a sign if you don't have a picture showing everybody the difference between sign area, what's the sign base, where's the monument, what's this kind of sign look like. If you don't have any supporting graphics in the sign, and I'll point out too, this is the only sign code I've ever seen that had no supporting graphics whatsoever. None. I have never seen another code. So I don't know, it's weird and it's not effective. And we need to change it. So the objectives as I drafted this code, and for the sake of transparency, I'll let you know it's based very strongly on a previous sign code that I'd written for another community when I was a consultant. After Reed versus Gilbert, so it has passed the muster. This general format of sign code has been adopted by 2 other communities that passed the muster of both city attorneys. So I'm confident we've addressed the case law concerns. So what my objectives were in this rewrite were to bring the code into compliance with recent case law, as I covered, improve the organization, language, and user friendliness of code, remove regulatory language from definitions, account for recent industry trends and practices, streamline processes and procedures, incorporate graphics to support and clarify textual content, enhance opportunities for free speech, and allow greater advertising flexibility for local businesses and organizations. So those were my key objectives here. So let me talk about the changes that I'm proposing. Now, as I do this, we're not going to go line by line. We're not going to get into the nitty gritties of the individual regulations. I'm going to cover it at a higher level tonight. One, so that Doug and I can join the budget meeting, but number two, I mean, it'd take hours if we went through this line. That's just silly. So what I'll do is I'll present the highlights. We can discuss the highlights, and then I'll ask you to dig deep on your own and email me any comments you might have on the specific regulations. That way we can consider it as we incorporate the feedback we get through this first round. We can also consider what might need to be changed on the regulatory side too. So that hasn't already been reworked. So the first thing we'll do is, you notice, so I'm pointing up here, it's on the screen for those of you who don't have a copy. I'm going to go ahead and bump up the size a little bit so you might be able to see it a little better. The first thing, just to talk about the organization, it's very tightly organized. Intent and purpose, applicability. Then as you go down, substitutions clause, everything's in a specific order, and it's based on, you go from the most general to the most specific is how I tried to do it. So the things that are broadly applicable would be kind of the first portion of the document. And then as you get into the regulatory and things get tighter, it's a little bit farther down once you've already had the opportunity to see the base information that you need in order to regulate your sign. The next thing is language. And just to give you an idea, let me go to let me read this definition here for you. Frontage. So you see this? I'm not going to read it. I'll just show you. So that's basically what? A fifth of a page or so? A full paragraph just to describe street frontage, okay? And I will point out too, lineal is an improper term. It should be linear. That is a pet peeve. Lineal only refers to your family lineage. It is not a measurement. But I mean, look at what it takes to just describe frontage. But so what I pared that down is to a one sentence definition. The property line of a parcel that is or are shared with a highway or public street road. That is all, that is the definition of frontage. You don't need anything. So that's just one example of how I'm trying to put things in plainer English and really streamline the writing so that we can get straight to the heart of the matter, and so it's more understandable. Graphics, I'll just give you an idea. Here's one of the work samples of a sign code, previous sign code. So for structural classification, for example, there's actually photos that show. Now, I was living in Wichita, Kansas when I did the sign code, so a lot of these photos are from Wichita. I took them, so I can use them as much as I want. They were my personal, I took these photos on my own time. It's hard to find examples of all the different sign categories here locally. So I'd probably reuse these if nobody cares. Because really what we're not looking at location, we're going to be looking at just being able to define what the signs are. Some other things, so for each of the different types of classifications, I'm going to use graphics that illustrate those classifications so that you don't have to just rely on the description. This, for example, are the different components and dimensions that will be used in order to calculate allowable allowable sign area and what the structural types are based on the structural type. This just is examples. Yeah, that's probably all the examples. At any rate, I think that that's good enough to get you the idea of what I've talked about. Oh, here we are. Sign face, sign width, sign area. This is what you need to know to just another example of the types of graphics that I plan on using. Once again, I prepared these, I drew them, so I can use them. And they weren't copyrighted. So already got that done. So what else? Sign classification. This is where things are going to start getting different, because since we can't classify by content, which is the typical, we're basically classifying by the physical attributes of the sign. And this is, for all intents and purposes, most sign codes in the country have gone to some form of this classification system. So we're signing. So essentially there's two types of classifications that we're using. We're using the structural classification and the display classification. All right. So for structural classification, what we're talking about, there's one of the categories is portability. And what that is basically, is it a permanent sign or can you move it?
Is it a truck?
Or is it a fold-up sign, like a sandwich board or a A-frame? Is it designed to be easily moved, or is it designed to be a permanent attachment? Then there's the method of installation. So it can be a building sign, you see, like attached to a wall or a window, perhaps. A freestanding sign, which like the one we had just discussed previously for Mr. Harris, it stands alone on its own. A ground sign, which is directly on the ground but not on a foundation. It's a direct bury type of situation. Tethered, which would be more like a balloon sign or a banner, since it's fixed with a rope or something like that. And a vehicle sign. And then the other structure, there's a bunch in the structure type, but you'll notice the definitions are all lined out. It's pretty easy once you look at the picture to understand what it is you're describing. Whether it's a canopy sign up here, can you all see where I'm moving my cursor? Which would be on the canopy of a gas station normally. Pole sign, monument sign, large, see, bigger than 6 feet. See, lots of people like that. Most communities try to encourage monuments. Classification of structures, that's all of that. And then the next is display classification. So there's 4 different types of categories that we do for display. One is the panel quantity. In other words, does it have 2 faces or 1, basically? Panel type. So this is really the characteristics such as the location of the message or the framing or the medium. Just a few examples: air motion, balloon, banner, changeable copy, digital video, flag. And then movement. So is it a dynamic sign? Is it built to move or portray movement, or is it static? Not. And then the lighting. The lighting is also considered because you need to regulate lighting to avoid, like if it's externally lighted, you need to make sure they're aimed properly. So you need to have some regulations to control the lighting, because that can create a lot of problems if you don't do that correctly. In terms of the regulatory framework, there are some general standards laid out. No, 22. Oh, that's because I'm on the wrong document. Look. So in terms of the regulatory framework, zoom back out to you. So there's. Did I put the wrong? No. Oh, 20, I did. It's page 20, not 22. So general sign standards. These are the standards that are applicable universally, essentially by all signs, either all signs or all signs of a particular type. Like, for example, construction materials. Going extremely slow. Permanently installed sign structures for signs classified as fixed must be combustible materials except for wood or other materials capable of providing sufficient strength. So, you know, those sorts of things. So those would be universal, but then we also have some that are specific to, for example, building signs, as you see here. So these are general across a whole category or all signs in general. And then we've also, it's also split up to regulate by fixed signs and portable signs. Generally, portable signs are also temporary signs, but that's not universal. A portable sign can be a permanent sign. So that's the reason why we didn't regulate it as permanent and temporary. So it is fixed and portable. And then we further, if you take a look, so for example, these are the fixed sign regulations. There are a few different categories, like for these zoning districts here, there's specific uses where, so this is what you would call context sensitivity. What you want is to be, what we're trying to do is make sure that the signs are allowed are appropriate for the setting. That's really all that means. So therefore, you're gonna regulate them a little more highly when they're in a residential setting, and you loosen up as the, you know, as the uses become more intense, and you would typically lessen the degree of regulation because it's not as required, and it fits with the context, the surroundings that it's in better. And we've done the same thing with basically broken down the portable signs in much the same way as in terms of the way they're categorized. And the other thing that I mentioned, wanted to mention to you is modernizing the code to current trends. So encourage monument signs over pole signs. Pole signs are ugly. There's no reason we should be capping monument signs at 6 feet. I still cannot wrap my brain around that one. Why would you promote a pole sign when people will, and they want to see something nicer? They'll put a monument sign out there, but they can only have it 6 feet if it's a monument sign.
Especially we talked about the grade.
Exactly,
It's
like the grades.
wait a minute.
I just, that's the one aspect of this code that really has always had me scratching my head. I already mentioned context sensitivity by taking into account, rather than just saying broadly blanket regulations on the types of signs or the size or the area allowed, tailor those things to the context, to the environment that it's going to be in, by tempering that with the land use types and the zoning districts. And then what I really did was increase flexibility for electronic signage while trying to maintain a higher degree of aesthetics. Currently, the only properties that would be allowed to have electronic message signs at all, or any sort of digital sign, are you have to have frontage on Route 3. Well, as we grow, that doesn't account for, in all likelihood, we're going to have a commercial corridor probably going up Route 158 toward Millstone as well, since that's a state highway. So I've also included that, and I have included frontage to I-255 to allow the electronic signage. And the other thing that I've done is I split out electronic message center into two categories, one that's just an electronic message sign and one that's a digital video sign. The differentiation is in the name. One has video capabilities, one does not. And the reason that's important is because I think the electronic message signs are appropriate in locations where electronic message centers are not currently allowed. For example, a gas station price board. That's an electronic message sign when they have the digital displays. Technically, although nobody's right, technically our code does not allow that. You have to use a manual sign, not an electronic number, which is it's ludicrous. And then digital video. And I did focus on, for example, with the digital video and electronic message signs, one of the things that's really disturbing is that we have a 30-second requirement on ours. The message has to remain static for 30 seconds. That is not safe. Okay. Federal Highway Administration has done studies and they've found that the longer it stays, the more people crane their neck.
Guilty.
The recommendation for Federal Highway is 8 seconds.
I've got it.
8 to 10 seconds is what's normal. So that's what we're putting on there. If it takes you more than 8 seconds to read a sign, somebody needs to go back to design school and learn how to design a sign message. So you don't put a life story on a sign, you put as few words as possible to grab the attention and see the message at 55 miles an hour, right? So at any rate, that is, I think that's the bulk of the highlights that I wanted to cover tonight. So what I'm like, in terms of
Scott, can you hear me?
Hello? Okay, can you hear us now? You're muted now.
Okay, what are we doing?
you got it? You back?
I'm back now.
All right. So anyway, the main difference between whether it's in the building code or zoning code, aside from it being more closely linked to land use if it's in the zoning code, is also the way that variances are handled. Because under the current situation, the way it works, as you're used to, the application's submitted, it goes to Plan Commission acting as the Street Graphics Advisory Committee to make a recommendation to City Council who then approves, taking into consideration the plan commission recommendation. If it were in the zoning code, it would have to go to the zoning hearing officer who would render the decision. And then it would only go to city council if they decided to review the matter. And then they can override it if they wish at that point. But if they don't vote to review it and override it at that point, the zoning hearing officer's decision stands after 21 days. So that's kind of a quick explanation of the difference in variances. And that's the reason why you didn't see anything on variance in there, because we need to answer that question before I can figure that out. And like I said, if you, I wouldn't do that until we did actually integrate it into the zoning code. I mean, you know what? There's no reason we couldn't put it directly into the zoning code if you wanted to, though. We just have to conduct a public hearing, and it would have to go through a little longer route to get approved, but you know, we've been living with this code for how many years? So what's an extra 30 days in the approval process if that's the route we want to go? So I'd like to hear that feedback from you. In terms of the timeline and cost, one or the other, the processes aren't significantly different from the time standpoint, comparing one of them to the other. As far as a variance goes, about the same. I mean, we wouldn't change the application fees or anything like that. We'd stick with that, and really the length of the timeline is about the same. It's just the method of approval that winds up being different. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on building code versus zoning code and any general input you might have based on what we've talked about at a high level tonight. And then over the next month or so, at least before the May 10th meeting, if you can send me any comments you might have on the specific details in the regulatory side of things, I appreciate that. So, Mr. Chairman, that's what I have. I'd be happy to entertain any questions, comments, feedback you may have.
Thanks, Scott. Anybody?
I mean, I know when I start doing our building code analysis stuff for work, I'm going to the zoning code when it comes to signage, not the building code.
Right.
So 100% zoning code, whether it happens a little bit later, like you said, we've been living with it for this long, and it's been okay. What's an extra 30 days? One of the comments I had regarding electronic message centers was, and I know technology is always changing, so you're really getting into a slippery slope when you make any reference to quality or anything like that. I just, whenever I think of electronic message centers, there's a particular sign in another community that I automatically think of, God, we don't want that. You know, we don't want to ever allow that. So if there's a way to work in a certain level of quality without getting too technical that it's outdated immediately, that would be something I would look for. And I know that the only other comment I had was, I know this kind of, it's along the lines of censorship, but appropriate language, if there's any way to regulate, you just can't do it. People just know better. They have to know better.
They can say whatever they want. Not a darn thing you can do about it.
Okay, that's what I figured, but I figured I would ask.
That's the reason why you've seen a lot more bumper stickers and such
Yeah.
lately with the F word. Not a problem.
Yeah.
I will add, the effort here is wonderful. Good to see that we're getting here. Number two is totally agree with the zoning. I think that's where it belongs. And a third point, I have some things in here that I would talk to you about. But
Okay.
other than that, I think you're here.
Sure, if you want to give me a call or
I
send
will.
me an email,
I will.
we'll sit down. Regarding the, one of the things that, as written, if you didn't get to dig into the details yet, so as far as a freestanding sign, they are still going to be required on a monument type sign, so there is going to be higher control on that. Although I did broaden it out though to allow some wall signage, as well, but only, it's only on, that wouldn't be your primary form. That would only be internal to a site, like for a multi-tenant type thing situation. So that way it's basically only viewed by people who are gonna be on that site anyway. So I think I've got it addressed okay. It's worked well in the other communities that have adopted this code. So I think it's pretty, will address the quality issues as well.
I just want to say exactly what you said. This is amazing just to see this happening. I know this is 12+ years ago, but when I had my store in town, we were in the old distillery center and we were not allowed to have signage on Main Street, but our building was in the very back. And because we had used up our square footage on the building.
Yeah.
And we had to resort to a standard floor sign, which was technically illegal. But there was no way to inform people of our business in the back. So I just love that this to me says to the businesses that we're willing to work with them to help them in their special needs of location and all that. So yeah, my main focus is just gonna be helping the businesses get, especially with us growing so quickly, we're running out of property on Main Street and even on Route 3. We're gonna have to find hopefully a aesthetically pleasing way to get their advertising out there, but to also, be on the same page. Right now, I feel like it's them versus us with signage, and I hate that. So this is awesome.
Well, one of the things that I specifically wanted to address, and perhaps Beth can attest to this, 100 square feet to be the most area of signage that is allowed under your code is ridiculously
Yes.
low. Ridiculously low.
Yeah.
The biggest sign possible is 10 by 10, and that has to cover everything on a lot. That it's absolutely absurd. I cannot believe the business community has not burned down the house prior to now. I mean, that is like nothing.
They've come close.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculously small amount of signage. So really, in large part, it's based on the linear feet of frontage. So it takes into account the lot size, but there are multiple signage a lot. I've tried to put the aggregate area limit by the different types of signage that are allowed on the lot. So that way you're not capped at a total square footage for the whole lot, but it's a total square footage allowed or a quantity allowed for a certain type of sign on the same property.
And that's a game changer.
Yes, so that way, you can have window signs, and then like your collateral signage, they're defined as incidental signage. So that doesn't count against your sign code. There's no reason like a menu board for a McDonald's should count against your sign regulation. I don't know that it does. We haven't done that kind of in the current code. But there are some things it's like they really want to over-regulate it. If it's only intended to be seen on the lot, it is exempt from regulation in this code as written. If it's only intended for somebody who's on that property, you don't have to have a permit for it. It's this ludicrous. So we're really talking about the signs that are intended to grab attention and pull people off the streets into your property. And there's still regulations, but yes, it is opening up to make sure that there are more opportunities here. And I can assure you, I've seen this code in action with 2 different communities. It does not erode the aesthetic quality of the community. It just simply provides more opportunities to get the message out that they're trying to get out. So.
I think you had a good point with the other routes, 158 and possibly, but when you think about a sign on those routes, and I think of the speed limits, a small sign is like dangerous when you got a 65-mile-an-hour speed limit. So are you planning to alter the sizes or requirements on? Are you gonna do?
It is context sensitive though.
Okay. Nice. Nice.
based on this, like I said, the sign type, the land use or the zoning district, and then down to different types of uses in the district. Generally speaking, most commercial, retail or commercial are handled in the same way, but there are some, for example, like a church in a residential district. They would, you would want to limit, the amount of signs and the lighting and everything in a residential district, whereas a church, with frontage on Route 3 might be completely different. It's more suitable for that environment. There are benefits to having your church in a residential area. You are reaping those benefits. You do not need the benefits of the one that's are along Route 3, right? So that's really the way you look at those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I think my zoning district's a good idea. I mean, makes sense.
So just to clarify, is there a consensus then that it belongs in the zoning district? Is there anybody who disagrees with that?
Well, what would be the argument for having it in the building?
I
I mean,
don't know.
I don't see why.
Better way of putting it.
As near as I can tell, somebody in the past made it an effort to develop as many boards and committees as possible in the city. So that required, 2 more committees. So they got their quota for that month, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it just seems ludicrous. I mean, why wouldn't you try to streamline stuff and make things as easy to handle? Not only from the point of the public having to be the consumer of the product, but as you being the administrator of it. I mean, why wouldn't you want to make it as easy as you can? I don't know. It just seems like some things were done just specifically to be difficult. I don't know. I have no other explanation for them.
No, I mean, that could have been the reason.
Um,
Times change, I was just thinking, for example, the grading. I don't know what was here first, the establishment or an establishment or the roadway. How many times has that thing been paved over, torn up and regraded? So things do change over time, you know what I mean? So grades can change. I don't know how you'd work that into,
I mean, yeah, you get to update it once you change your code, or once you change your sign, I guess. Or I mean, if something happens and a roadway gets constructed and you want to, the only part that is subject to the permit is going to be the structure. After you've already been assigned a permit, you can change the copy as much as you want without getting a permit. I mean, because what's the point of getting a permit if you can't regulate what that content is anyway? What's the point of charging somebody to get a permit and go through that whole rigmarole again when you can't regulate it anyway?
What's your timeline look like? Are you planning on?
I guess I can. Okay, so the idea would be to have a final draft for review within the next 30 to 45 days or so. We're shooting at 60 days for final adoption, and maybe that would be maybe slightly longer, depending on. Since I'm hearing from the commission that we want to put it in the zoning code, we may well just go ahead and just put it in the zoning code, because then I don't have to write a variance section. The variance section is already written. So might go ahead and just adopt that and keep that as is. That way it's in the code already when we update the zoning. So if you're on board with that, I'll proceed in that fashion. So it might take a little bit longer to get it adopted, since we'll have to do a 30-day notice and a public hearing for that. But I think it's the right move. It's the right way to go.
And like Tony said, what's the reason to not do that?
There really isn't any reason not to do it. Like I said, this is the first code I've seen where it wasn't in the zoning code or standalone as its own section of municipal code. I've never seen one in a zoning, in a building code before.
I think pictures are good too, by the way.
Good.
I'm a picture guy. Just makes it easier. You know, if you got a good picture, it eliminates probably 5 questions.
It does. And what it's really useful for is to provide clarity sometimes what's difficult to understand in language.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of hard to explain
is.
some things in really concisely, right?
Pictures say 1,000 words.
Exactly.
Never heard
No.
All right, is that, you have anything else, Scott, on that?
No, that's all I have. Appreciate the feedback. And like I said, please dig into the specifics and the regulatory side so I can get your feedback on that. I'd like to have it before we get to the next meeting, if at all possible. So by May, no later than May 10th. And that should be able to keep us on a good timeline.
Do that. Everybody agree? Thanks, Scott. Unfinished business, committee reports, staff reports, communications,
None.
none. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this festivity.
Motion adjourned.
Beth, I got a second.
I'll second it.
Steve? Roll call, please.
Joe Dormer,
Definitely yes.
Paul Huckey,
Yes.
Steve Gold,
Yes.
Beth Sanchez,
Yes.
Amy Westler, yes, Tony Murphy,
Yeah.
Lauren Noby. Yes. Andrew Johnson.
Yes.
All right, thanks, everybody. I can.
Hey, Hal, stay on the line for just a sec. I just wanted to mention everybody that as restrictions start to loosen, starting next month, we're gonna be back over in the council chambers for our meetings. So that'll be changed. And in all likelihood, Zoom is gonna be going away and we're just gonna be broadcasting Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Vimeo. So there won't be, if you're not at the meeting, you're not gonna be able to participate directly in a meeting. You will be able to, however, watch it, which is more than we ever had before. So,
Oh, yeah.
Gotta watch some quorums then,
yeah,
right?
so, got it, Hal?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, I just want to make sure you heard what I said.
All righty. Anything
Right.
else? With that, I'm gonna close this meeting out.
Scott, can you hear me? Scott?